Hi, it's William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri YouTube video series, and today we are in 1915 with a diary entry. Our recap: in 1939, Grunwald was describing to Maria how mystified he was by the relationship between Dmitri and Lord Beaverbrook, and that the man Beaverbrook had made a good impression on him and convinced him that he respected Dmitri, but because of Beaverbrook's profession, the fact that he was the owner of a newspaper that was, of course, trying to keep its very large circulation, that he might have some ulterior motive with respect to Dmitri and getting gossip or whatever. But anyway, we'll return to that topic. And our recap for 1915, well, the book and the game. The book being Anatole France's book, The Crime of Sylvester Bonnard. Very good book if you would like to read it, and it's been translated into English. And the game being chess. And aside from golf, which Dmitri could get very frustrated with when he was losing, or not when he was losing, it didn't seem to bother him so much, the idea of losing a game, as performing badly. And his critic in those instances was himself and not the other player or players. So yeah, we will continue on with that. Our cast for today, we have Ella, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, Maria, Dmitri's sister, and a new author, a woman, a Russian woman by the name of Kryzhanivskaya. All right, so this is the 21st of January / 3rd February. We're still deep in the winter season. In Usovo, it's 5.5 degrees below freezing, a little windy, but generally clear. That's the weather report as Dmitri gives it to us. And here we go. I got up around 11:30. I slept well, but I've started waking up during the night. I'm probably leading too quiet of a life and not getting tired out enough. I went for a walk in the morning and slid down the hill several times. It was quite nice. I got a telegram from Auntie saying that she can't come here because she's too busy. Maria will finally be arriving on the 27th. GM is going to go to Petrograd to get her. Maria, that is. GM and I lunched at 1 o'clock, after which we skied down the hill, though of course most of the time we both just fell. There's so much snow that it's only possible to walk widely, and even then you sink almost to your knees. Tea was at 5 o'clock, after which I read The Iron Chancellor of Ancient Egypt by Kryzhanivskaya. Not very interesting and difficult to read. I continued with it until dinner, after which I sat down with GM to play chess. He beat me mercilessly, of course, but I never play these days. I've probably lost the habit. All right, all of that is fair enough. When I say it's only possible to walk widely, that is literally what Dmitri says, but I don't know what he means by that. I guess I have a fair amount of experience walking in deep snow because I always used to go to Davos in the winter. And nowadays, when I go in the spring and early summer, some years there's still a lot of snow. And if I go hiking pretty high up, I'm sometimes walking through snow that, you'll sink up to your hips or up to your knee. Excuse me, I've got to sneeze. And it never occurred to me to do a wide stance that would be helpful. It seems like it would just put you off balance. So I don't know if that's what he actually means when he talks about walking widely. Yeah, he's not using snowshoes. Otherwise, he wouldn't sink to his knees, would he? I've never used snowshoes. It's probably something I should look into because it really is exhausting when you have to walk through such deep snow, as I'm sure many of you know. Yeah, okay. Did Dmitri want Ella to come visit him in Usovo? That's a question that interests me because you remember when he was a young adolescent, 14, 15, 16, he wasn't getting along very well with her. And he wasn't really wanting to be around her. But in 1915, previously when he was in Moscow, he seemed to really enjoy visiting with her and spending some time with her. So maybe he did want her to come. This is the first time he's mentioned it. And I remember when he was an older adolescent, but was still in her care, and she would take him with her wherever she went. If she went to the Crimea, she took Dmitri. If she went to some watering place in Germany, she took Dmitri. And I remember that he would get very frustrated with her, not when they were traveling together, but just in everyday life, because she was so preoccupied with her charitable work and with these wounded soldiers who needed to be rehabilitated. Well, that was more right after the Russo-Japanese War. But yeah, she was genuinely preoccupied with what she was doing as a nun and as an abbess, I guess. So, but he doesn't say it hurts his feelings or anything. Just very matter-of-factly, she says she can't come. Maria, on the other hand, is coming. So interesting that Laming is going to pick her up in St. Petersburg. She has her own people, obviously, but yeah, I mean, Laming is kind of dad to both Dmitri and Maria. Not to take anything away from Paul, but so that's nice. He's going to Petrograd to pick her up and to accompany her to Usovo. And now let's turn to this book. Dmitri doesn't tell us specifically that he finished Sylvester Bonar, although he was enjoying it. He spoke highly of it. But he started this new book about ancient Egypt, The Iron Chancellor of Ancient Egypt. And I had not heard of it before. I don't think it's still in print. I'm pretty sure it isn't. It was one of 4 novels written about ancient Egypt by this woman named Vera Kryzhanivskaya, and she also wrote historical novels about ancient Rome and I don't know what all, the Middle Ages. I think ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and the Middle Ages. And she wasn't just she just wasn't just an ordinary novelist, because of equal importance to her and her activities, she was, quote unquote, an occultist. She was involved in seances and mediumship and all kinds of things. And in fact, she wrote under the pseudonym Rochester because she claimed that her books were more or less dictated to her by the spirit of a deceased person, an Englishman whose name had been Rochester. So that's interesting. So-called occult things were very, very big at this time and would get even bigger after the disaster of the First World War and all the deaths. And as we know, Dmitri got interested in them, primarily in what nowadays would be called New Age stuff, but New Thought, and with a strong tendency toward Eastern religions. But I don't know if that was why he took up this book. It wasn't a new book, unlike the French novels he was reading. It came out in 1899. So when he was still a child, it came out. And unfortunately, he doesn't tell us how he chose it, whether it was simply there in the library at Usovo, and he thought, okay, why not? When he finished with the Anatole France book, he doesn't tell us anything about the, occult content. He doesn't say, This was written by Rochester, which is the pen name for this crazy woman who thinks that spirits write through her. He doesn't say anything like that. I don't know if it's because he's not informed or it's just at this point in his life he's not interested. I think primarily that came later, although the ground was kind of being plowed for that, so that he would be receptive to it later. The book itself, it got some sort of moderate critical praise, but the famous writer Gorky, who was a friend of Grand Duke Nikolai Mikhailovich, said that it was basically trash, that it was basically lowbrow kind of stuff. So Dmitri tells us that he doesn't really like it and that it's hard to read. Why is it hard to read? It wouldn't not, I think, have been challenging to read in the way that Anatole France and Paul Bourget. I mean, this book, the Le Demande de Midi, that he was reading and that he just consumed and adored, that's a complicated book. But this one is more like, yeah, probably a beach read or something like that. So why is he finding it difficult? I don't know. Maybe any book is hard to read if you're just not that into it. All right, and he's just really bothered by this chess situation. This fascinates me, as you can probably tell. Yeah, what's going on with that? And was Laming a very good chess player? Was that why Laming was winning every time? Certainly Laming is not going to let Dmitri win. We can see that for sure. He mercilessly beat me, Dmitri says. But yeah, it's too bad the old boy didn't have chess.com, or the youngster, I should say, in 1915, because he could have improved his game quickly. Well, if he was persistent, he could have improved it quickly, learned some openings, that sort of thing. I also wanted to mention that this idea of he pretty consistently, in the 1915 diaries and later on in other years, talks about his sleep. If he slept badly, if he slept well. And from the impression I get from that, as a text analyst, is that it was a problem for him. Otherwise, it just wouldn't come up, let alone over and over again. And Graf, in his memoirs, later in Dmitri's life, in the 1930s, Graf describes him as being a person who was just really suffered from insomnia and was up all night a lot of the time. So, yeah, that's too bad. That certainly is annoying. I'm sure we all know what that's like, to be really tired and go to bed, and then you just keep waking up. Sounds like jet lag, actually. But, he could be right that he's not, especially with all this snow, so he's not spending 5 hours outside every day. He probably just isn't getting tired out enough. So what do we have next time? We have the last section of the Grunwald letter. Really, really interesting stuff about this fellow named Volkov, Admiral Volkov, who was going around saying horrible, offensive, pro-fascist things in London, and according to Grunwald, giving the Russian emigres in general a bad reputation, because people just assumed that they were all like Volkov. And interestingly, my godmother and her husband, my godmother was the first cousin of a Volkov, who was the son or nephew or grandson of Anna Volkov, who famously was a German spy. She was a white Russian in England, but she was spying for the German, and she was imprisoned during the Second World War. And they told me some interesting stories about her, so hopefully we'll have time to talk about that a little. Anyway, our next 1915 entry, well, we'll actually have some war news for once. It's been a while since Dmitri has mentioned the war. We'll hear something about Paul's health, Dmitri's father, and we'll find out. We'll find out if the status quo will be the same with respect to this book on ancient Egypt on the one hand and with the chess on the other. Does he continue to dislike the the Ancient Egypt book? Does he continue to lose at chess? Maybe yes, maybe no. That's about as much of a cliffhanger as I can come up with at the moment. So I hope to see you next time. Bye.